Okay, so you've got trial.pdf right there in front of you, and you really want to understand engine calibration, but you don't have a lot of time.
Right.
We're going to deep dive into this document together,
Absolutely.
pull out the really essential stuff you need to know,
Yeah.
and basically figure out what engine calibration is all about.
Yep.
So trial.pdf defines engine calibration as a process of guiding the engine to generate desired power output and gaseous pollutants and storing that information into engine's memory, or EMS.
Okay.
It's interesting to me right away that it mentions both power output and gaseous
Right
pollutants.
from the start. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's not just about power, it's also about emissions.
It's all about finding the right balance.
Mm-hmm.
Modern engines need to perform well,
Right.
but they also have to be clean.
Exactly.
So the document really highlights this twin objective:
Yeah.
optimize the performance and control the emissions.
Okay, so to actually do this, to guide the engine, like the document says,
Yeah.
it needs a few basic things, right?
Right.
It needs sensors, actuators, and an engine management system, or EMS.
Makes sense.
So it's like the engine needs its senses, like oxygen levels, engine temperature.
Right.
It needs actuators to actually do stuff based on that information.
Yeah, like the muscles of the engine.
Yeah, and then the EMS is like the brain.
Exactly, the central control system.
Orchestrating everything.
And that's where all that calibration data gets stored.
Okay. And then the document breaks down engine calibration into three main parts: performance calibration, emission calibration, and onboard diagnostics calibration.
Okay, so we've got
So one's about how the engine runs, how powerful it is, how responsive it feels to you as the driver.
performance.
Right, exactly. And then there's keeping those pollutants in check.
Emission control.
Right.
Super important.
And then diagnostics is kind of like the engine's own health checkup system.
Making sure everything is running smoothly.
Right, but they're all connected.
Right, absolutely. Performance emissions diagnostics.
You can't
yeah.
just tweak one thing in isolation.
Totally, they all influence each other.
Okay, next up, the document talks about offline calibration and online calibration.
All right, so what's the difference here?
Well, it seems like offline calibration happens when the engine is off,
Okay,
and online calibration happens when it's actually running.
so you do some prep work offline.
Yeah, it seems logical. You want to have a good baseline before you start messing with a running engine.
It's like a chef prepping their ingredients before they start cooking.
Exactly.
Makes sense.
So let's talk about offline calibration in a little more detail.
Sure.
The document specifically mentions hardware characteristics.
Okay.
And this is broken down further into sensors, actuators, and engine characteristics.
Right, so this is about understanding the physical parts of the engine.
Yeah, and what they can do.
What are their limitations?
Before you even start thinking about performance or emissions, you need to know what your sensors can actually sense, what your actuators can actually do.
Right, like what are the physical limits of this particular engine?
Exactly.
Its size, its type.
All of that.
That all fundamentally impacts the calibration process.
Okay, and then the document mentions base calibration.
All right, so what's that all about?
It sounds like that's where you set the initial settings for the engine.
Based on all that hardware knowledge.
Right, you're establishing a starting point.
Okay, so that's your foundation.
Yeah, and then we move on to online calibration.
Right, where things get a little more dynamic.
Right, the document mentions static calibration, open loop, and dynamic calibration, open loop.
Okay, and then it says, let's start the calibration journey.
Yeah, so now we're actually getting into the practical side of things.
It's like the document is saying, all right, you've learned the basics.
Now let's go.
Now it's time to fire up the engine and start fine-tuning.
Right, and just to be clear, everything we've talked about so far is based on this trial.pdf document.
It's our guide for this deep dive.
Okay, so to recap, engine calibration is all about making sure the engine delivers the right amount of power while also keeping emissions under control.
It's a balancing act.
It is, and it all relies on this system of sensors, actuators, and the EMS.
Working together in harmony.
Right, and it's a multi-stage process that starts with understanding the hardware, setting a base, then moving to those online adjustments.
Offline prep, online fine-tuning.
Exactly.
So we've talked about this core goal of balancing power and emissions through engine calibration.
Right.
And it makes you wonder, what kind of trade-offs do engineers have to make in this process?
Yeah.
Because it's not always simple to just max out power and minimize emissions at the same time.
Right. You probably have to make some compromises.
Exactly. So think about that. What are those trade-offs and how do engineers navigate them?
Something to think about.
Yeah. Yeah, food for thought.
Okay, well, that's our deep dive into trial.pdf.
I hope this was helpful.
Yeah, we covered a lot of ground.
We did.
But now you have a much better understanding of engine calibration.
Absolutely.
Thanks for joining us.
My pleasure.
See you next time. Bye.